He noticed the wrongness in a moment so small that any sensible man would have dismissed it, and Dorian Kestrel was a sensible man. At least, he had always believed himself to be one. Yet the remark stayed with him long after the street had emptied behind him, long after the canal beside him had gone black under the winter sky, long after he told himself that nothing had happened at all, because a stranger had looked at him on a narrow Bruges street and reacted to a choice he had not made yet. It was the evening of February 6, 1902, just after 5:40 p.m., and the air had the sharp, clean bitterness of a Flemish winter. The stones beneath his boots were damp from earlier sleet, and a thin mist hung above the canal like breath that had not yet faded. Dorian was walking home from the municipal records office, his collar turned up, his leather gloves tucked into his coat pocket, because one seam had split, and he disliked wearing imperfect things. He was 38 years old, unmarried, careful in dress, careful in speech, careful in almost every visible habit. And if anyone in that office had been asked to describe him, they would have said he was reliable before they said he was kind. That was not because he lacked kindness. It was because reliability was easier to notice. He kept the same desk, arrived at the same hour, sharpened his pencils before opening ledgers, and corrected dates in other people's records with a patience that seemed almost religious. He believed in sequence. He believed a life could be understood if its events were put in the right order. Birth before schooling, schooling before work, courtship before marriage, debt before payment, crime before punishment, thought before choice, choice before action. This was not philosophy to him. It was simply how the world remained bearable. That evening, however, he had been thinking about bread. Nothing grand, nothing tragic. Just whether he should stop at Van Hove's bakery on Steenstraat before going home. He had not decided. The possibility was only half-formed, soft and unfinished, the way small decisions often are when they pass through a tired mind. He could stop and buy the dark rye loaf he liked, or he could go straight home and make do with the previous day's bread. He had not turned toward the bakery. He had not slowed at the corner. He had not even placed the decision fully into words. A man passed him then, a tall figure in a brown coat with a brimmed hat pulled low, and without stopping, without smiling fully, without even appearing surprised by what he was saying, the man murmured, "Good choice." Dorian slowed. His right foot touched the stones, then held there a fraction too long. "Pardon," he said, turning. The man continued walking. "Sir?" Dorian called, a little louder. The man did not look back. Within moments he was swallowed by mist and evening traffic, leaving Dorian alone beside the canal with a sentence that had nowhere to belong. Good choice. Dorian looked toward the bakery street. He had not chosen it. In fact, the moment the stranger spoke, the decision became impossible to make naturally. If he went to the bakery now, it would feel like obedience. If he went home, it would feel like resistance. He stood there for nearly a minute, irritated at himself for allowing a meaningless remark to trouble him, then turned away from the bakery and went home hungry. That should have ended it. In an ordinary life, a strange remark becomes a story told once and forgotten. But Dorian was a man trained by work and temperament to preserve details, and that small detail did not fade. It sat inside him through supper, through the cleaning of his ink-stained cuffs, through the quiet hour before bed, when he usually read from a book of legal proceedings. By midnight he was still awake, staring at the dark outline of the wardrobe across the room, wondering why a stranger's words had felt less like a comment and more like an answer. The next morning, Thursday, February 7th, dawn came pale and reluctant. Bruges stirred slowly. Shopkeepers lifting shutters, carts creaking toward the market, church bells spreading their sound across wet rooftops. Dorian left his apartment at 7:35 a.m., walked past the fishmonger's stall, nodded to Madame Verhagen at the corner, and reached the records office 7 minutes before 8, as always. The office occupied the lower floor of an old stone building near the square. Its windows were tall and narrow, its walls thick enough to keep summer heat out and winter damp in, and its rooms smelled of dust, wax, ink, and wool. Dorian's desk faced a row of shelves holding property transfers from 1870 onward. To his left sat Peter Klaus, who hummed when he counted. To his right sat Jules Armand, who never remembered where he placed his spectacles. The chief registrar, Monsieur de Witte, had a cough that worsened with weather and a habit of saying, "The paper remembers what men prefer to forget." Dorian liked that sentence. It felt true. At 9:20 a.m., he began sorting 2 sets of files, canal tax disputes from December and late marriage registrations from January. He had to choose which stack to complete first. He placed his hand between them, hovering, not because the choice mattered much, but because he liked to finish difficult tasks before easier ones, and was deciding which was truly more tedious. His fingers drifted toward the marriage registrations, then stopped. Before he touched them, Peter, still writing in his own ledger, said, "That one takes longer." Dorian turned. "What did you say?" Peter looked up, surprised. "What? You said that one takes longer." Peter blinked. "I said nothing of the kind." "You did. I assure you, I did not." Jules, from the other desk, laughed softly. "Perhaps the marriage records speak for themselves." Peter shook his head. "I was reading figures." Dorian looked at the stacks again. His hand was still suspended between them. "You must have heard someone outside," Peter added. "The window is not fully shut." Dorian nodded, because nodding ended the conversation. But his stomach had tightened. He had not chosen. Again, someone had responded before the action existed. By noon, he had convinced himself the similarity between the stranger's remark and Peter's alleged comment was accidental. Bruges was full of murmurs. Offices were full of overlapping speech. A tired mind could misplace words. Yet, in the afternoon, when Jules offered him tea and Dorian was about to decline because he disliked tea after 3 o'clock, Jules withdrew the cup before Dorian spoke and said, "Of course, you never take it now." Dorian stared at him. "I hadn't answered." Jules smiled. "Your face answered." That was reasonable, annoyingly reasonable. Faces often answered before mouths did. Still, Dorian became conscious of his own expressions for the rest of the day. He tried to make them neutral. He tried to think without moving his face. It was impossible. Every thought seemed to want a muscle, every hesitation a twitch, every preference a glance. By evening he was exhausted, not from work, but from monitoring himself as if he were both man and witness. He did not stop at the bakery. He did not pass the same canal if he could avoid it. He went home by a longer road, angry at the inconvenience, and angrier that he had chosen inconvenience because of fear. On Friday, nothing happened until afternoon. That made it worse. He spent the morning waiting for something he did not believe in. Every comment seemed suspicious. Every silence seemed full of preparation. At 12:40 p.m., he went to a small dining room near the square where clerks often ate soup and bread. He sat alone near the rear wall. The waitress, a red-haired woman named Annika, placed a bowl before him and said, "No pepper today, then?" Dorian looked up sharply. "Why do you say that?" "You always ask for pepper," she said. "Today you looked at it and changed your mind." He had looked at the pepper. He had changed his mind, but he had not spoken. "I suppose I did," he said. "A man doesn't need words for everything," she replied, moving to another table. That sentence should have reassured him. Instead, it made the world feel more dangerous. If people could read him from small signs, then perhaps nothing strange had happened at all. Perhaps the mystery was only that he was more visible than he wished to be. That thought bothered him in a different way. Dorian had built a life around quiet privacy. He was courteous, useful, and distant. He did not share more than necessary. He did not invite questions. His rooms were tidy, his correspondence brief, his griefs private. The idea that strangers might know his choices before he voiced them felt like a violation, even if the explanation was ordinary. That evening, determined to reclaim his own mind, he stopped at Van Hove's bakery, deliberately. The baker's wife was wrapping loaves when he entered. "Rye," Dorian said, before she could greet him. "A fresh one, if possible." She smiled. "I kept one back." He froze. "Why?" "You always come when the frost is heavy," she said. "And yesterday you did not, so I thought today you might." He wanted to ask whether a man in a brown coat had passed, whether anyone had mentioned him, whether she had somehow expected him because someone else had known he would come. Instead, he paid for the loaf and left. Outside, across the street, beneath the awning of a closed tailor's shop, stood the man in the brown coat. Dorian saw him clearly this time. He was perhaps in his 40s, though his stillness made age difficult to judge. His face was narrow, clean-shaven, pale in the winter light, with eyes that did not search because they seemed already to have found what they needed. He was not smiling. He was not hiding. He was simply there. Dorian stepped toward him. A cart passed between them. When it moved on, the man was gone. For 3 nights after that, Dorian slept badly. He dreamed of ledgers in which entries appeared before ink touched the page. He dreamed of doors opening before hands reached them. He dreamed of himself sitting at his desk while another version of him stood behind his chair, whispering corrections. On Monday morning, he woke before the bell, sweating despite the cold, and found himself standing in the middle of his bedroom without remembering rising. The room was dim. The floorboards were cold under his bare feet. For one terrible second, he wondered whether he had chosen to stand or whether his body had simply obeyed something already decided elsewhere. He dressed slowly. At work, he made mistakes. Small ones, but for Dorian, small mistakes were humiliations. He transposed 2 numbers in a land parcel, placed an 1898 certificate among 1896 records, and wrote March where he meant February. Monsieur de Witt noticed by 11 o'clock. "You are unwell," he said. "No," Dorian replied. "Distracted, then?" "Perhaps." The chief registrar leaned back, studying him. "A distracted clerk is more dangerous than an absent one. An absent man leaves the paper untouched. A distracted one teaches it lies." Dorian lowered his eyes. "It will not happen again." "See that it doesn't." The words struck harder than they should have because Dorian had spent years making certain that paper remembered correctly. Now he had begun to distrust memory itself. That afternoon he conducted a private experiment. He placed 3 envelopes on his desk, left, center, right. In one he put a blank page, in another a receipt, in another a folded note on which he wrote, "I chose this after deciding." He shuffled them until even he no longer knew which was which, then sat with his hands in his lap. "Choose," he whispered. He waited. No one spoke. Peter had gone to retrieve records. Jules was filing in the next room. The office was quiet. Dorian stared at the envelopes until his eyes watered. He decided he would choose the right envelope. He did not move. He waited 5 seconds, 10, 20, as if delay might create freedom. Then, just before his hand rose, a voice behind him said, "Not that one." Dorian stood so quickly his chair struck the shelf behind him. No one was there. The doorway was empty. The window was closed. His heart hammered in his chest. "Who said that?" he called. Jules appeared from the next room. "Said what? You heard nothing?" "No." Dorian looked back at the envelopes. His hand trembled. He reached for the right one anyway and tore it open. Inside was the folded note. "I chose this after deciding." He sat down slowly. The sentence looked ridiculous now, childish, desperate. He laughed once, a short sound without humor. Jules entered fully. "Dorian, I am fine. You don't look fine." "Then don't look." Jules stepped back, offended. Dorian apologized immediately, but the damage had been done. By the end of the week, the office knew something was wrong with him. People became gentle in the way that made him feel worse. Peter stopped humming near his desk. Annika at the dining room asked if he wanted his usual and waited for his verbal answer with exaggerated patience. Madame Verhagen greeted him less cheerfully, as if loud kindness might break him. The world had begun to react not only to his decisions, but to his unraveling. On February 15th, at 4:10 p.m., the man in the brown coat entered the records office. No one announced him. No one seemed to notice him at first. Dorian was writing when he felt the room change, not physically, not visibly, but in the same way one senses a person standing too close behind them. He looked up. The man stood near the public counter, gloved hands folded over the head of a walking stick. Monsieur DeWitt approached him. "Can I help you, sir?" The man's eyes remained on Dorian. "I believe he can." DeWitt turned. "Kestrel?" Dorian rose slowly. "Yes?" The man placed a small card on the counter. "I require confirmation of a death record." "Name?" Dorian asked, though his mouth had gone dry. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether it has happened yet." DeWitt frowned. "Sir, this office is not a theater." The man finally looked at him. "No, it is worse. The theater admits rehearsal." Silence fell. Dorian stepped forward. "Who are you?" The man smiled faintly, not kindly, not cruelly. "Marius Venn." The name meant nothing to Dorian, yet it struck him with the force of something remembered. "Have we met?" Dorian asked. "Not from your side." DeWitt exhaled sharply. "If you have business, state it plainly." Marius Venn looked at Dorian again. "I will return when he is ready to write it." "Write what?" Dorian asked. "What he has not done yet." Then Marius lifted the card from the counter and left. No one stopped him. Later, DeWitt called Dorian into his office. "Do you know that man?" "No." "He knew you." "It seems so." "What did he mean?" Dorian hesitated. He wanted to tell the truth, or some portion of it, but the truth sounded like illness. "I don't know." DeWitt's face softened slightly. "Take 2 days." "I don't need rest." That was not a suggestion. Dorian went home before sunset, carrying shame like a physical weight. His rooms felt smaller than usual. He placed the rye bread on the table, removed his coat, lit the lamp, then stood without moving. If he stayed still, perhaps nothing could be decided. If he refused action, perhaps sequence would have nowhere to go. But stillness did not free him. It only made him more aware of the next possible movement. Sit, eat, read, sleep. Every option felt already watched. He remained standing until his legs ached. At last he whispered, "What do you want?" The room gave no answer. Then, from the corner near the wardrobe, Marius Venn's voice said, "Less than you think." Dorian turned. No one was there. He backed into the table, knocking the bread to the floor. "Where are you?" he demanded. Silence. "Where are you?" he repeated. This time, the answer came from behind him, close to his ear. Ahead. Dorian did not sleep at all that night. Morning found him seated at the table, eyes dry and burning, the bread still on the floor, and the lamp dead. He tried to write down everything that had happened. The act of writing steadied him at first. He listed incidents by date and time. February 6th, strangers said good choice before bakery decision. February 7th, Peter or unknown voice responded before file choice. February 10th, envelope experiment interrupted. February 15th, Marius Venn at office. But as the list grew, something strange happened. The words felt insufficient. Written facts made the events look smaller, almost foolish. They did not capture the sensation of being late to oneself. He tore the page out and burned it in the stove. At noon, despite being ordered to rest, he left the apartment and walked until he reached the canal where Marius had first spoken to him directly. Snow began falling in fine, dry grains. The city was quiet. He waited. He felt ridiculous. Then Marius appeared beside the bridge, as if he had been part of the stonework until Dorian needed him. "You came," Marius said. "You knew I would." "Yes." "Because you predicted it?" "No." "Because I had already done it?" Marius looked pleased, though not in a happy way. "Closer." Dorian's hands curled inside his coat pockets. "Explain." "You won't like it." "I dislike ignorance more." "No, you don't," Marius said. "You dislike the feeling of being ignorant. There is a difference." Dorian stepped closer. "If you know what I haven't done yet, tell me how." Marius looked out over the canal. "You think time is a road, isn't it? For most people, perhaps it feels that way. One foot, then another. A corner turned, a destination approached. And for you, for me, it is more like a room full of voices speaking at once. Some are louder because they are near. Some are faint because they are far. But near and far are not the same as before and after." Dorian shook his head. "That explains nothing. It explains why you are frightened. I am frightened because you keep responding to things I haven't done." "No," Marius said gently. "You are frightened because part of you recognizes the responses." Dorian wanted to deny it, but the denial failed. That was the worst part. Marius's words often felt impossible, but not unfamiliar. They struck some hidden place in him that reacted before reason arrived. "What am I?" Dorian asked. Marius turned to him, delayed. The word was simple. Dorian almost laughed. "Delayed?" "Yes. Like a train. Like an echo." Dorian stared at him. "An echo of what?" "Of a life that has already chosen itself." The snow thickened. A church bell rang somewhere distant, slow and muffled. "If that is true," Dorian said, "then why am I aware of it?" Marius's expression changed for the first time. Something like pity moved across his face. "Because awareness is sometimes the last thing to arrive." Dorian stepped back. "No. You asked." "No. You wanted explanation. Not that. No one wants the explanation that fits." Dorian turned away, breathing hard. "Then what happens next?" he asked after a moment. Marius did not answer immediately. "You try to prove me wrong." Dorian looked at him. "Do I?" "Yes." "And do I succeed?" Marius smiled faintly. "Would you believe me if I told you?" That afternoon, Dorian began his rebellion. It was not dramatic. It consisted of small, deliberate acts against expectation. He walked streets he never used. He ordered coffee, though he disliked it. He entered a church, though he had not gone except for funerals in years. He purchased a red scarf from a market stall simply because he had never owned anything red. Each act gave him a momentary sense of triumph. "See," he thought, This is mine. This is choice. But each time some reaction came too early. The stallholder had the scarf folded before he requested it. The church caretaker opened the side door before he knocked. The coffee arrived without sugar, exactly as he'd been about to ask, though he had never ordered coffee there before. By evening, his rebellion felt less like freedom and more like performance. He began to suspect that unpredictability, once chosen, became predictable too. That thought nearly broke him. On February 18th, he returned to the office. De Witte looked relieved and displeased at once. "Better?" he asked. "Yes," Dorian lied. Work steadied him for nearly an hour. Then a sealed packet arrived from the provincial archive. It required cataloging. Dorian cut the twine, opened the packet, and found inside a set of old municipal death notices from 1884. He sorted them mechanically until one name stopped him. Marius Venn. Death recorded November 3rd, 1884. Age 41. Cause drowning, presumed accidental. Dorian read the line 3 times. His hands went cold. He searched the remaining pages. There were 2 witness statements. One claimed Marius Venn had fallen into the canal near dusk. Another claimed he had stood on the bridge speaking to someone no one else saw. The body had been recovered the next morning. Dorian took the page to De Witte. "This man," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Do you know the name?" De Witte adjusted his spectacles. "Marius Venn? Old case? Why?" "He came here." "Who came here?" "Marius Venn." De Witte looked up slowly. "Kestrel. You saw him." "I saw a man give that name." "You spoke to him?" "A man may use a dead man's name." "Why would he?" De Witte lowered the paper. "Why indeed?" It was not belief, but it was no longer dismissal. That mattered. De Witte closed his office door and asked Dorian to tell him everything. Dorian did, not all at once, not smoothly, but completely enough. The stranger's remarks, the early reactions, the envelope test, the canal conversation, the voice in his room. De Witte listened without interruption, his face grave. When Dorian finished, the older man remained silent for a long time. "There are 3 possibilities," De Witte said finally. 1, you are unwell. Dorian flinched but said nothing. 2, someone is playing an elaborate cruelty. And 3, something is occurring for which I have no proper category. Dorian looked at him, almost grateful. "Which do you believe?" "Belief is dangerous, but I believe this. You should not be alone tonight." Dorian nearly refused out of pride, but pride had become a useless luxury. That evening, De Witte came to Dorian's apartment with a heavy coat, a notebook, and a seriousness that made the situation feel both better and worse. They sat at the table with the lamp between them. "We will test only what can be tested," De Witte said. "You will decide something privately. I will observe. And if something responds, I will write it down. And if nothing does, then we will write that down too." Dorian nodded. "What should I decide?" "Something I cannot infer." Dorian closed his eyes. He chose a word, not a meaningful one, not something likely. Apricot. He had not eaten an apricot in years. He opened his eyes. De Witte watched him. "Well?" "I have chosen." The room remained silent. 1 minute passed, 2. Dorian felt foolish, then relieved, then strangely disappointed. De Witte wrote, 8:14 p.m. Subject chose private word, no external response. Then, from the stairwell outside the apartment door, a voice said, "Apricot is a poor defense." De Witte's pen stopped moving. Dorian stared at him. "You heard it." De Witte did not answer at first. His face had lost color. "Yes," he said finally. They opened the door together. The stairwell was empty. DeWitt stayed until dawn. He asked questions through the night, not as a doctor might, but as a clerk of reality, trying to establish order in the impossible. Did the voice always come after decision? Did Marius appear only in certain places? Did early reactions occur more often during hesitation? Dorian answered as best he could. By morning, DeWitt had filled 12 pages. He tore none out. "What will you do with those?" Dorian asked. "Keep them," DeWitt said. "Paper remembers." "And if paper is late too?" DeWitt looked at him sharply, but had no reply. The next week became a dissent disguised as investigation. Dorian and DeWitt designed tests. Dorian would write decisions and seal them before acting. He would select routes by rolling dice. He would ask others to choose for him. Nothing restored order. If he rolled dice, someone commented on the result before the dice settled. If another person chose his path, Marius appeared at the destination before Dorian knew it. If Dorian sealed a decision in an envelope, the envelope sometimes contained a response when opened, written in handwriting, neither his nor DeWitt's. You chose before you wrote. Delay does not create freedom. Once, in frustration, Dorian refused all decisions. He sat in DeWitt's office from 9 a.m. until nearly 2 p.m., motionless except for breathing. He refused tea, refused lunch, refused conversation. At last, DeWitt said softly, "This is also a choice." Dorian closed his eyes. From the corridor, Marius Ven's voice answered, "And not his best one." Dorian struck the desk with his fist hard enough to spill ink. "What do you want from me?" he shouted. The office fell silent. Clerks stared. DeWitt dismissed them with a look. No answer came. That evening, Dorian found Marius waiting in his apartment, seated calmly at the table as if invited. The lamp had not been lit, yet Dorian could see him clearly in the blue dusk. "You cannot come in here," Dorian said. "I already have. Leave." "I already did. Stop speaking like that." "I already stopped." Dorian grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "Are you dead?" Marius considered the question. "From one direction." "What does that mean?" "It means death is not always an end when seen from elsewhere." "Elsewhere?" "Ahead, behind, outside, choose whichever word lets you sleep." "I don't sleep." "No," Marius said. "Not much longer." Dorian's blood chilled. "Is that a threat?" "No, an observation." "Of what?" "Of what you have not done yet." Dorian sat opposite him slowly. "Tell me." "You won't believe it." "Tell me." "Anyway." Marius leaned forward slightly. "You are going to write a record." "I write records every day. Not like this one." "Whose record?" Marius looked at him with that unbearable calm. "Mine." Dorian stared. "Your death record already exists. Incomplete. It says drowning." "Yes. Was that false?" "Not exactly." "Then what is missing?" Marius's voice softened. "The witness." Dorian understood nothing, and yet dread rose in him as if the meaning had already arrived beneath language. "Who?" he asked. Marius did not answer. He didn't need to. Dorian stood so quickly the chair scraped back. "No." "You asked." "No." "You always say that when the answer catches up." Dorian backed away. "I wasn't alive in 1884. Not in the way you mean. That is nonsense. Most truth is nonsense before it becomes memory." "Get out." Marius stood. "You will go to the bridge." "No." "You will read the missing statement." "No." "You will understand why I know what you haven't done." "No." Marius moved toward the door. "And then you will decide whether knowing changes anything." Dorian shouted after him. "I won't go." Marius paused in the doorway and looked back. You already did. The next day, Dorian tried to destroy the path before it formed. He stayed away from bridges. He refused archive packets. He told DeWitt everything, and the old registrar listened with a sadness that frightened him more than disbelief would have. We should find the original file, DeWitt said. No. If there is a missing witness statement, no. Dorian. If I read it, I become part of it. DeWitt's voice lowered. You may already be part of it. Dorian laughed bitterly. You sound like him. I sound like a man trying to help you before fear makes you useless. That struck. Dorian turned away. And if helping me is exactly what leads there? DeWitt said nothing for a moment. Then he answered carefully. A man can become trapped by trying to avoid a trap. They found the original file in the lower archive beneath the office, where older cases were stored in boxes that smelled of damp cloth and dust. DeWitt carried the lamp. Dorian carried the keys. Neither spoke. The file was in a warped wooden drawer labeled 1884, Municipal Accidents, Water-Related. Inside lay brittle papers tied with faded ribbon. Dorian's hands shook as he untied it. There was the death notice, the 2 witness statements, a report from the watchman, a sketch of the canal bridge. And beneath those, folded separately, a page that had been sealed but never catalogued. DeWitt inhaled sharply. It was here. Dorian wanted to leave. Instead, he opened it. The handwriting was difficult, but legible. A statement withheld due to irregular testimony. Witness claims deceased spoke to a man not present. Witness claims man answered questions before deceased asked them. Witness name not entered due to confusion of identity. Dorian read the final line and felt the archive tilt around him. Description of unnamed witness. Male, approximately 38 years, dark hair, gray eyes, clerk's hands, scar on left thumb. Dorian looked at his left thumb. A small pale scar crossed the knuckle, made in childhood by broken glass. DeWitt whispered, Dorian. But Dorian could not answer. The paper continued. Witness reportedly said, He will think he is choosing this later. Dorian dropped the page. The lamp flame shuddered. For a moment, neither man moved. Then, from the darkness beyond the shelves, Marius Venn said, Now you're closer. DeWitt spun toward the voice. Show yourself. Marius stepped into the lamplight. DeWitt crossed himself unconsciously. Dorian did not move. Why? Dorian asked. Why me? Marius looked almost tired. Because you were there. I wasn't. You will be. That's impossible. Yes, Marius said, and still. Dorian pressed both hands to his face, trying to hold himself together. What happens on the bridge? Marius answered, You tell me not to step back. Do you? No. Then why would I say it? Because you know I won't listen. That makes no sense. It will. DeWitt's voice trembled. Is this fixed? Marius looked at him. From where I stand, it is remembered. And from where he stands? Marius turned back to Dorian. That is the cruelty. No one spoke for a long time. The archive seemed to shrink around them. Finally, Dorian picked up the witness statement again. His fear had not vanished, but something else had joined it. Anger. If I am there, he said, then I will change it. Marius's expression softened. I know. You don't know what I'll do. Dorian. His name in Marius's mouth sounded like an old sorrow. That is what you said then, too. The bridge stood near the edge of the old canal district, a narrow stone crossing where the water turned sharply between high walls. Dorian avoided it for 2 days. On the third, he found himself walking toward it just before dusk, though he had taken a different road deliberately. The city seemed to guide him by absence. A closed street here, a crowd there, a cart blocking another turn. By the time he saw the bridge ahead, he felt less like a man arriving than a sentence being completed. Snow had begun again. Marius stood on the bridge, one hand resting on the stone rail. Dorian stopped several paces away. "Don't," he said. Marius smiled faintly. "There it is. Step away from the rail." "I don't." "You can." "Can I?" "Yes. Do you believe that?" Dorian swallowed. "I have to." Marius looked down into the black water. "I did not fall by accident." Dorian went still. "What?" "I stepped back because I heard someone tell me not to." "Why would that make you step back?" "Because I had been living as you are living now. Every warning became a chain. Every prediction became a wall. When someone finally told me what I would do, I wanted one action that belonged to me." Dorian's throat tightened. "So you did the opposite?" "Yes." "And died?" "Yes." The wind moved between them. "Then don't do it again," Dorian said. Marius looked at him. "This is not again for me." "It is for me." "Yes?" "Then let me change it." Marius's eyes held his. "Do you want to save me, or do you want to prove you can choose?" Dorian opened his mouth, then closed it. The question struck too deeply. "Both," he admitted. "That is honest." "Step away." Marius did not move. "If I step away because you ask, is that my choice?" "It can be." "If I step back because I refuse you, is that?" Dorian said nothing. Marius smiled sadly. "You see the problem?" Dorian stepped closer. "Listen to me. Maybe freedom isn't doing the opposite of what is known. Maybe it isn't surprising time. Maybe it's choosing with full knowledge and still meaning it." Marius's expression changed. For the first time, Dorian saw uncertainty there, real uncertainty, human uncertainty. The snow thickened. The water below made no sound. "Say that again," Marius whispered. Dorian stepped closer. "Freedom is not proving the future wrong. It is doing what is right even when the future is watching." Marius stared at him. The moment stretched. Dorian felt something shift, not outside him, not in the bridge or snow or canal, but in the order of things. For once, no voice came early. No one reacted before him. The next second belonged to silence. Marius lifted his hand from the rail. Dorian breathed. Then a shout came from the far end of the bridge. A watchman, lantern raised, running toward them. "You there?" he called. Marius turned toward the sound, startled. His foot slipped on the icy stone. Dorian lunged, grabbing his sleeve. For one suspended moment he held him. Marius's weight pulled downward, the fabric tearing under Dorian's grip. "Hold on," Dorian shouted. Marius looked up at him, not afraid but astonished. "This part," he said, "I don't remember." Dorian tightened his grip with both hands. "Then help me." Marius reached for the rail. The watchman arrived, seized Dorian by the coat, and together they dragged Marius back onto the bridge. All three men collapsed onto the stones, breathing hard. The watchman cursed them both, called them drunk, mad, suicidal fools. Dorian barely heard him. Marius lay on his back, staring up into the falling snow. Then he laughed. It was not a loud laugh, not joyful exactly, but broken and disbelieving. "I don't remember this," he said again. Dorian sat beside him, shaking violently. "Good." Marius turned his head. "You changed it." Dorian looked at his hands, red from cold, trembling. "No," he said slowly. "We did." The days that followed did not become simple. Stories like that never become simple. The watchman filed a report about two men nearly falling from a bridge, one of whom gave a name belonging to a dead man. The report was eventually misplaced, then recovered, then filed under irregular incidents. David amended the old record, though not in the way Dorian expected. He did not erase the death notice. He placed beside it a new statement, dated February 22, 1902, describing the recovery of a man calling himself Marius Venn, previously recorded dead in 1884, condition alive, identity unresolved. Paper remembered both versions. That bothered some people. It comforted Dorian. Life, he began to understand, was not always a clean ledger. Sometimes the record held contradiction because truth itself had survived by refusing to be neat. Marius did not remain in Bruges long. He visited Dorian once more before leaving. He looked older in daylight, less like an omen, and more like a tired man who had spent too many years being certain of sorrow. "Do you still know what I haven't done?" Dorian asked him. Marius considered this. "Less than before." "And what does that mean?" "It means you are arriving closer to yourself." Dorian smiled faintly. "That sounds like nonsense." "Most useful things do." Marius put on his hat. "You will still feel it sometimes, the delay, the fear that a choice has outrun you. And when I do?" Marius paused at the door. "Ask whether you're trying to choose freely, or merely trying to surprise the future. They are not the same." After he left, Dorian stood by the window for a long time. Bruges moved below him in its old rhythm. Carts, bells, footsteps, voices, breath in cold air. For the first time in weeks, the world did not feel like a machine already finished. It felt unfinished in the most frightening and merciful way. He returned to work. He made mistakes sometimes. He corrected them. He stopped believing that order meant certainty. He stopped thinking every hesitation was weakness. Years later, when younger clerks asked why an old file in the archive contained two records for the same man, one dead and one alive, Dorian would only say, "Some records are honest because they don't pretend the world was simple." And if they pressed him, he would smile in that quiet way people smile when they have survived something they cannot fully explain. He never saw Marius Venn again. Not directly, but sometimes in small moments, just before making a difficult choice, Dorian felt the old fear return. The sense that somewhere ahead, someone already knew. When that happened, he did not freeze as he once had. He did not rebel merely to prove he could. He breathed, looked carefully at what was before him, and chose as honestly as he knew how. Because he had learned that control is not always the same as freedom, and certainty is not always the same as truth. And now I want to ask you something, not as a trick and not as a simple ending, but because this is the question Dorian carried for the rest of his life. If someone knew what you had not done yet, if every choice seemed to be waiting ahead of you before you reached it, would you spend your life trying to prove them wrong? Or would you try to make the choice meaningful anyway? Tell me what you would do in the comments, and if this story stayed with you longer than you expected, stay for the next one, because some mysteries don't frighten us because they are impossible. They frighten us because they feel almost true.